This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Sale Sharks S&C coach Rob Simpson. He discusses his work at Sale and how he individualises his practice, the culture they have created at the club and how this benefits player development, as well as his core belief in increasing a player's fundamentals and why this helps him during in-game performance. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Right, Rob, think you officially can say me and you have had the worst technological challenges there that I've ever had doing this podcast in 176 odd episodes now. But we're here now. We can hear one another, we can see one another, and we've changed multiple devices, but we're all good. So yeah, apart from that, how are things?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Zoom was playing its part there this morning, but yeah, good, very good. Very happy to be here. Thanks.
Perfect. So I guess for people that don't know you, haven't come across your work, can you just explain to us who you are and what you do from a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so obviously my name's Rob Simpson. Currently a senior strength and conditioning coach at Sale Sharks. My primary role is I look after the senior academy players, and mixed amongst that are a number of senior players as well that are in the first team. I think I'm coming up to what will be my seventh or eighth season now with Sharks. Uh, Prior to that, I was like most S&Cs, I think, a failed athlete. My sport was water polo, so had all the aspirations in the world going to the Olympics, but unfortunately didn't quite make that. But that's where I sort of got my love and found my passion for S&C with some coaches in there, and that's where I sort of started to hone my craft and practice what it was to be an S&C. So, bit of a development role with Manchester Water Polo. Um, Moving from there, some bits in British swimming into the women's water polo. Through unis, you do a little bit of work with netball. Somehow ended up in Paralympic archery, and then within Sale FC, and then at Sharks is where I'm currently at.
Perfect. So I think what also a really unusual journey to get to where you are, because normally people go into sports, similar to myself, you go into sports, stick in sports. So I think really nice, I guess, journey to get there. In terms of rugby, what's drawn you towards going down that route from where the roots that you had in water polo, etc.?
I think what I love, a bit like it holds many similar trends to water polo. I see a lot of similarities in it. And the sport I grew up playing, like rugby, there's not just one size fits all. In that rugby, you could have a 75 kilo scrum half, and then your tight head could be 140 kilos. In water polo, we have our centre forwards could be blokes at 110, 110 kilos. And then your position I played out on the wing, I was anything from 85 to 90 kilos, but both have to require to get up and down what is the pitch, and obviously work in unison. And there's a lot of similarities in that, and not just in the sport itself, but actually in sort of the dynamic of the sport. Um, Off the pitch, out the pool, I think they have a lot of similarities. So that's why I do enjoy working in rugby. But unfortunately, water polo isn't a sport like rugby in which it's professional in this country. It's more your Eastern blocks. So obviously, not being able to work full time in that role in this country, that's where I find sort of my fill and my passion for a sport I've loved growing up in rugby.
Perfect. So we will go down the rugby route, but I think we'll lean into this water polo stuff because I always say there's times where I do my research and bits don't necessarily come up, and it would have been hard for me to find this on you if I'd been speaking to people. So when we look at water polo as a sport, I know next to nothing about it other than maybe watched it a little bit during the Olympics and stuff. Can you just explain to people, I guess, what of its very basic level, how many players you got in the thing, obviously what you're trying to do, and then when you look at it from a physical perspective, what what are the effects? What's the outlay on the body that you would have during water polo?
Yeah, so again, the contact isn't there like rugby, although it's actually technically classed as a non-contact sport. And trust me, it is contact. It's essentially 7v7. You've got 4 quarters, 8 minutes, sorry, 7 minutes a quarter. Oh, is it back to eight now? 8 minutes a quarter now. So it's not a rolling clock either. So it's a rolling clock, but that play stops when the ball goes out of play. So you're actually in the water, staying afloat for long durations of time because it's 2 meters deep, and unless you're extremely tall, you ain't touching that floor, and you don't want to be caught touching the floor. So, like I said, you're tussling for position. It is a contact sport in my eyes, and like I said, there's many different positions, um, but it is very, very high repeatability, and you need a massive aerobic base to compete at it. So that's why I think it's a great sport in the sense that you've got guys that are absolutely huge, but then they have to have that repeatability and that high aerobic base and that strength there at the same time, and the skill set and the ability to they have to take a ball, take a pass, keep a man from pulling your head off, making the pass, pulling around him in a contact area, driving off the ball, all whilst in water is it's a very high skill. So that's for me what again why I love the sport. It sort of ticks so many boxes on that front.
And in terms of developing those skills, because obviously skills or the base, how would you go around doing that? Because I'd imagine that me going on a road run would help a little bit, but it's also negligible to what would happen if you're actually in the pool. So what would it look like when you're trying to build that base to be able to make those repeated movements whilst, at times just treading water? Yeah, how do you train that base?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I came from a swimming background, so I was a swimmer first, so I had quite a good sort of general swimming base and repeatability because I was a short distance sprinter. So that was covered. But for me, I'll be honest, it probably wasn't technically the best. So when I was 17, I moved to 16, 17. I left home and I moved to Grantham, which was water polo academy. And we would be training twice a day. Morning might be a swim session, and then the evening that would be more of our technical, where we would literally just pass, and our coaches would put us into different scenarios of passes around the back of the head, passes behind us, taking passes from different at different speeds, different distances. So then you'd be developing the passing, but then you would literally be doing your base work. You'd come away, so you might have a small skill set there, but in between that, you could be doing quite a tough leg session in the water, being that right. Okay, you've got. I remember some sessions we'd get the like milk cartons, and you'd fill the milk cartons up, and you'd be holding yourself out of the water, and you'd be pouring the milk carton out. And you'd have to get higher as the water fell out. So then it was just again. So without me even knowing I was doing it, I was developing a skill set, repeatability, and some capacity to perform those skills. And then you might go into the end of the session where you're going to more of your technical side, where you'd have a 7v7 game scenarios, and then you'd go through plays as well. So again, like rugby, like football, we'd be practicing what we call a man up. So we have an extra man advantage, and how do you manipulate your defense to find a space? How do you move your goalkeeper? How do you move your defender? How do you? And then again, what I didn't touch on there is we'd have a bit like our rugby, we'd have contact element blocks where we'd be working for 20, 30 seconds, trying to take a ball off the other man, no hold barred in water. But then it'd come away and then it'd be like, right, okay, now we need to do it within the rules of the game. How can you manipulate somebody's body? How can you get yourself underneath them, kick off them legally to create that space, all at the same time communicating? So, like a bit like rugby, you just drop it into different sections. But I think, being honest now, when I think back, is the structure of how the rugby is set up and how our training sessions are set up are probably more so now, where before it was just more of a, when you were younger, it was like, right, okay, get in, we're going to do a little bit of contact for 10 minutes, we're going to do a little bit of skill for 10 minutes. So, okay, then we're going to play. And then that was it, even at a young age. I was 16, 17, and I was playing against 30, 35-year-old blokes from Hungary, from from Holland. And it was just like a very quick learning curve.
And when you're looking at it from like physical development point of view. So I look at footballers, and most footballers have really strong quads just for the nature of repetitive ball striking, and that's naturally where you lead to. In water polo, what is it that you're going to get high levels of repetition? Like what muscle groups are you using,
So
and how does that affect then what you need to train maybe when you're out the pool to counteract that loading of one particular area?
yeah, so it's shoulders, a hell of a lot of shoulder injuries. Like I said, like you'd spend a good amount of time just passing for distance, passing at pace, and you think about the action of that and the speed that not myself, but some of the professionals can throw a ball. You think about the loading going through your shoulder as you're releasing that ball. It's huge. So there would be a lot of work prior to getting into the water around just rotator cuff strength, externally rotating because everything is over the top. Even you swimming, it's anterior based. So we do a lot of work, posterior work, just bringing your shoulders back and setting that shape. Because you look at traditionally look at swimmers, the posture as well. It's very much it's very kyphotic. So we do a lot of work and just bringing your shoulder blades back and making those strong and robust as possible. And that will be a lot of banded work, a lot of body work, certainly when you're younger, just to get used to those shapes. And it's just without knowing it again, it's when I go back to the systems and processes I use with my athletes. It's we focus on like the foundational patterns and movement adaptability in those ranges. Um, so again, that's how we'd go after it without knowing we were going after it when we were much younger.
When you talk about movement adaptability, can you just, I guess, define that for us one, and then give us maybe some examples of what you mean?
Yeah, so I think when I take about it from a rugby's perspective, I go foundational patterns first. So that would be your basic movements like you squat, you push, you pull, your lunge, different planes, and then you've got to be able to do those for me. If you can't do those, you can't do the tasks at a higher pace, at a higher movement schema. So the movement, that's your movement adaptability. So okay, can you hit those same shapes at speed with a bit of reaction in them as well? So that might be if we're talking about the rugby, okay, you can get into a good lunge pattern in the gym, nice and controlled. But as I go through your plyometric continuum, what's happening to the body, where you breaking down? You're breaking down the ankle, you're breaking down at the knee, the hip, and then I'm putting you on another challenge. If you're comfortable there, okay, now can you do that with a ball in hand? Can you transfer a ball across your hip, across your chest? Can you hand off, keep your hips square whilst hitting good positions to sprint? Same in the water polo. Okay, can I rotate my hips, take a ball and hand off at the same time, but drop my left leg, pass to the opposite side? But if I can't hit the foundational patterns of pressing overhead, pulling, and holding those shapes, I know I'm not going to be able to control and disassociate my own limbs and have an awareness of my own body in space, also the other athletes' body in space. So it's just a movement down that schema.
And how would you assess where a breakdown point is? So you mentioned around having those foundational movement patterns or foundational skills. Let's say use a squat as an example because it's one that most people listening would have done a squat at some
Yeah.
point. How would you assess where the breakdown is, and then how would you look to go around fixing maybe a particular area? So let's say, for example, it's a squat, and you can see in there's challenges around their ankles which aren't allowing the movement that's required.
Yeah, so I think what you'll see 9 times out of 10 when someone obviously is squatting, you'll get that dip and that roll in or that heel raise. And for me, it's more coaching eye. So I wouldn't necessarily stand there and do an FMS screen or something like that. I'd film it. I'd show the boys. Okay, this is the pattern we're seeing. Okay, why is that happening? What are you feeling? I'd ask the question to the player. What are they feeling? Because sometimes you might see something and they're unaware of it. So you obviously coach the player, not the exercise. So it's okay. I'm asking you to squat. What are you seeing when I squat? And what are you feeling when you squat? Are you feeling where your feet are orientated? Are you feeling your sort of your own body, your awareness of where your feet are? And if I show them a video, 9 times out of 10, again, young lads now, they'll be like, oh, I wasn't aware I was doing that. And then you might just be able to cue it out of them via that. But obviously, if there is a restriction around tightness and so on there, there are exercises outside of just doing the squat that'll naturally open up range around the ankle. So you'll have some of the prehab bits. You might get some of the banded work, wrap a band around the back of the ankle, kneel into that, knee over toe. That opens up my pelvis as well at the same time. So I don't necessarily always just go hit the ankle, hit the ankle. If I'm seeing someone's get that heel raise or that collapse, I'm looking through the chain as well. Because the if that's collapsing, yes, 9 times out of 10, the rest is collapsing, but I can work them in unison. And at the same time, we've got very good physios at the club where they can delve a little bit deeper into some of the on-bed assessments and they can manipulate the work there. So it's sort of a I'm not just rambling on there. It's just there's many roads to it. A different exercise will actually naturally open up some of those joints around the ankle and so on.
And how does that change between the, I guess, the age of the players? So if you've got someone who's maybe 32, 33 that's been in the game for a period of time, maybe I'd imagine along that point has got some injuries or injury history, which you mentioned restrictions might restrict certain movement patterns or might make it more challenging to maybe a 16, 17-year-old player that's really fresh into it, maybe hasn't done a lot of this work. So maybe some of their adaptations are more like lack of knowledge or lack of awareness. How does that change in the way that you coach with the players?
Yeah, so I think it comes from knowing them, doesn't it? So when I know, like, there's one player that springs to mind, and I know that he's got some metal work in his foot, and if we try and put him in certain positions, I'm just gonna it's gonna actually hinder his ability to play. So I'm like, okay, this is the adaptation I need to help him with his longevity on the pitch. And essentially, what we've got to think about is the game's the end point. So don't, I think so many times, and like even when you're younger, you rush in, you're like, okay, I've got to use this one exercise. I don't, what cookie cutter Chris, cookie cutter program. Okay, this is what the adaptation we want. Are we agreed on that? Because that's it when they're older. What are we actually trying to achieve for you? They're part of the process. So what do you feel is going to benefit you? Okay, because this is what I feel is going to benefit you. This is a restriction at the moment. How can we get to that adaptation so this isn't restricting you on the pitch and at the weekend and it's still getting what I want? And the player, hopefully, as part of our process, will have created a framework for himself. So I had one player that ruptured his Achilles 2 years ago. And prior to that, he'd be very honest in that he wasn't on his on his prep. He wasn't looking after himself. He wasn't doing the things that he should have been doing. But since that whole injury has been a massive learning. So now, yes, he does have limited range there still as a result of the injury, but he has a process that's allowing him to get ready for the weekend. Whereas the other end, from 15, 16, we're trying to create habits for them. So the biggest thing when our players first and second years come in, we have a meeting on day one, which we're doing on Tuesday this week, next week, sorry, is about how we create separation because the success of and the failings of our senior players leave clues. So how do you create separation in that you're not just coming in, doing your gym and being seen to be doing your gym? It's you're 16, we want to work on your foundational patterns and your movement about adaptability. What can help you develop those and increase your longevity? If it is, right, on a Wednesday, our recovery day, it isn't a day off. Think of it as a day to get better. So I go with some of my young lads on a Wednesday morning to yoga. And it's showing them that the gym isn't always the answer. There's other ways within our environment to facilitate your athletic development. And there's a number of them now that come on a Wednesday morning. We go to yoga, and then they can feel how everything opens up around the hips, everything opens up around the ankle. And one of the guys I'm thinking about in particular, is a back row. His job is to get over at the breakdown. He's opening up his hips, he's opening up his ankle. Oh, yeah, your squat feels comfortable a little bit better now. Now we're actually increasing your peak force qualities via that, but we're getting better via recovery and you're creating better habits. So that's where the difference is that the younger and the older guys, to come back to the main question, is I try to facilitate. We're strength and conditioning coaches. We're not just firing and getting lads bigger and stronger. It's that for me, it's that whole the whole coaching side of things comes back around. I think it's the most important thing, and it's my job and a lot of the guys in the club's job to help lads understand what their week should look like and how they help themselves form good habits. Because the players that have got great habits, like Ross Harrison, for example, played over 250 games for the club. His prep is second to none in the club. The things he does day in, day out, how he recovers away from the club, that's where we want to get all of our players. And he is a product of the academy.
You've lent really nicely into what my next question was going to be. So I know in a football context, um, some players I can go and read through their notes, and it will say uh, really good football in and out of possession, blah blah, not engaging with S and C, and question mark of how can we change this? For you, you've got these young, impressionable players who are 16, 17. How have you had experiences of players that don't buy into maybe that program? And how do you go around addressing it to try and help them find something that maybe if they didn't necessarily have a massive interest in the gym type work, to give them an alternative route? Or is that an option where actually you just go down this is a non-negotiable part of being a professional rugby player, you have to do an element of it?
Yeah, so I don't want to. I try not to run a dictatorship, and I think if hopefully if you spoke to any of the lads that I work with or anyone, any of the players, they would all say that I do care a lot about how they develop, not as just as athletes as blokes. So I try and learn a lot about that player, about not that player, about that person. And then if I can understand that person, I can understand their motivation. If I understand their motivation, that's their why. I think anyone, any human being, if you understand their why they're doing something and you can show them a ticket to help, to facilitate them get to their why, I think they'll come on board with you. That's one side, but I also try and lead from my own actions and how I do things day in, day out. I try to be consistent in how I coach and how I hold myself around the place and how I deliver to the guys and the level of detail I give to the boys, because then it sets a precedent of, right, okay, this is the environment we're in. Because don't get me wrong, there've been times where you do have boys that don't enjoy coming in and doing the gym. Like it's not everyone as excited as by S&C as yourself or I. Um, but if you can show them how we can facilitate their development and getting to what they want to do, that they'll come on board, I feel.
Yeah, I find it a really interesting dynamic because ultimately, if you're in that environment, the players have a goal, which is to be a professional rugby player or be a professional football player, or whatever that looks like. And yeah, you have circumstances where you can almost say to them, listen, this is going to help you make that jump. If you engage with this, and it might be prehab, it might be yoga, it might be some strength-based stuff, it might be some more whatever it might be, if you really engage with it, this is going to help you on the pitch. But because they don't necessarily see always the really close link between those two things in the actions, at times you get this disengagement. And I find it fascinating. I guess all of us do it in some capacity. You know that you need to lose some weight, but you still eat crap. There's an element to it. But yeah, I find it a really fascinating dynamic.
Yeah, and that's why I try and pair players up as well, because my voice is one voice in that building. For example, we've got a young tight head coming through, and like we said before, like food is obviously another part of it. These guys have to be big, and their nutrition that isn't always on point. And whilst I'm not a nutritionist, it feeds massively into what we need to do. But that I know that okay, I've got a more senior tight head who's got an injury list longer than my arm. but he's played international level and he's a great scrummager and he's a great bloke. How can I get them two to work together? And that's why it's important where I don't just sit in my silo of I just work with the 18 to 23s. I try to get to know the senior lads because I go to my tight head, do you mind just sort of taking this lad under your wing on some of your prep? Like, because I think that's where he could benefit, but probably bored of my voice and he's already 15 kilos heavier than me. He's like, and now I'm telling him that he's not strong enough and he's already stronger than me. It's like your voice has a lot more weight. So try to pair those boys up together and being clever in how we do that. That pays massive dividends. That
And what's the dynamic with obviously those younger players are ultimately coming for those older players' shirts, right? So,
yeah, yeah,
granted,
yeah.
if you're 16, 17, maybe not as much because you still got a little bit of development. But when you start getting to, 20, 21 year olds, the younger lads are coming for the older lads'
Of course,
shirts.
yeah, yeah.
So, how do you manage that dynamic in terms of you're asking for help from an older guy to ultimately probably help his replacement or someone that might get him out of a job in 2 years' time?
Yeah. I'll be honest, the whole time, like I said, I've been that shark 7, 8 years now. The whole time I've been there, it's never been a problem. I've never had anyone push back and say, I'm not going to do that, Rob. He's coming for my shirt. And I think that's the beauty of sharks. Like we have a big saying, like, fear no one, respect all. And the squad that's been built by Al and Ferg Mulcrow and the people that have been pulled through the academy, everyone gets like honestly, like I've never had anyone refuse to help a younger lad. I think they see it as a rite of passage, and certainly in rugby, it's very much a culture of we do help each other. We look after our own. We've got a lot of lads from the north, and that's what we're very proud of. And then you've got those older lads that come through the process. They know what they're going through, and don't get me wrong, they ride the young lads. They make them work. They make it uncomfortable for them at times. But when there's an arm needs wrapped around and support given, the senior lads will give it.
Yeah, that's a really good place to be because I know that not all environments that's the case. So the fact that you do have that I guess brotherhood to a degree, where it's like no, we
Yeah,
will help the younger ones. That's a real positive for the program
and
for sure.
that's been pushed by Al, our DOR and Jamie Langley. That like sort of challenging that brotherhood, and it's not just okay like one taps and so on. It's like finding out and like learning a little bit about each other and our own whys. And I remember Al doing something about like right, everyone comes in and sort of shares a little bit about who they are and where they're from and like pictures of their family and so on. And then you get to know each other, and then it's you create rapport with someone just because they're 10 years older doesn't mean that they're not a bloke and they don't have family. And just because they're 10 years younger doesn't mean that they don't have family. And there's commonalities amongst us all. So I think naturally the environment that's been created facilitates development. And that's why I can only speak really highly of it.
No, I don't know if you saw the interview with Wayne Rooney on the overlap, I think it was.
Yeah,
And he was talking about obviously he spent quite a lot of time with Duncan Ferguson and I think
yeah,
Alan Stubbs maybe when he was like 16. And when you first hear that, you go, that's
yeah. He
kind
went
of
round to his
weird.
house. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he's like a 16-year-old. If you said to any normal person, oh yeah, this 16-year-old's just coming around my house, everyone would look at you and say, well, why? What's going on?
mm,
But I think it shows you a similar culture to what you're talking about there, which is actually you've got a couple of older players that probably understood how good Wayne Rooney was and kind of thought, listen, we need to help this lad a little bit in terms of just showing him maybe some behaviors or getting to know the person a little bit so that when we're having a pop at him on the pitch or whatever he knows it is coming from a place of care rather than this. I'm not saying they were bitter, but a 33-year-old Duncan Ferguson at the end of his career might come across as bitter because he's hammering the 16-year-old, but it's not. It's because he actually probably had an element of care for the boy.
yeah. It's a care for the boy, and it's a care for the badge, and it's care for where you come from. And everyone, I can hand on heart say, everyone that's in the club wants that club to succeed. Like Northerners are very very proud of where we're coming from, and what's going on up here. So there's a lot of love for the club, and by facilitating these younger lads, you're creating longevity of it. Because when these guys do retire, they want to see the club do well.
Yeah, no, I think yeah, as you said, it's a really nice place to be in. I would agree that my experience with Northerners, particularly if there's a team, for example, that's really high profile, then everyone gets behind that. I look at it, in league where you got St Helens and Bradford, they're like tribes.
Yeah,
Everyone is like, no, I am a member of this tribe, be it the ball boy through to the person working on reception, through to the actual
exactly.
players. They really ingrain and engross themselves into it.
Yeah, we've got a number of brothers in the club as well. We've got three Dupree brothers, obviously from South Africa. We've got Sam and Luke, who've come through the academy. So it's a, there's brothers within the club. So it's it's very tight knit group.
Perfect. So, I mean, on a football perspective now, and imagine you're the same, we're kind of moving into the pre-season period of football. I had training last night. I'm a little bit sore, but not too bad. So I was the one who put the plan together. So luckily, I didn't do anything too crazy. But when you're looking at it from your perspective, what type of maybe testing are you doing earlier on in the cycle? And yeah, what would your testing protocol look like, I guess, throughout pre-season to know that you've got the players ready for when that first game comes?
Yeah. So I mean, what we previously, like I think what S&C is moving away from a lot is just okay testing for testing's sake, and okay we're gathering a number and then it's getting stored in a computer. Oh, look what we did, and then not using it again. So what we try to do is just make sure our training is testing. So we're actually within sessions, we're seeing what we want to achieve. Again, I'm working back from the game, so the game is the end point. What I want to achieve is being achieved in certain elements of the training, whether that be in the units, in the standalone units, whether that be backs units, for example, whether that be the main team session. So again, when I go to my strands of development, one of them is integrated fitness. So okay, how am I making sure that the elements of the game I want are being tested within the training sessions? So okay, I know that I need a certain amount of accels per minute for a scrum half. Okay, what drill, when I look at the session, is going to facilitate that? And then the coaches have designed a session plan, and we know that X drill will give us these elements. So my nine's fantastic, we're covered. Then if I go to my intensity block on a Tuesday, more or so in a normal week, when we go for our faster blocks of high ball in play for a certain number of minutes, am I achieving my meters per minute, my accelerations per minute across the board? Because obviously I've got my tight head versus my fullback. And then if we're not, okay, do I need to then plug the gaps in that? So that's sort of going back from the game. But then when I'm thinking about developing sort of creating and making sure that the players are robust enough and trying to highlight areas that there may be potential weaknesses, we do your hamstring testing. So we do the ISO hammy hip extension. We do isolated calf. We do isolated groin. We're going to do some neck just to try and facilitate, sort of basically highlight anyone that's coming back in a potentially a bit of a weaker area. So then when we go to their planning and periodization and their programming, okay, this is something you need. Player X, you need to push a little bit harder on this because we've seen you've actually dropped off a little bit in this. And hamstrings, for example, are a massive injury problem across all team sports. So yes, the strength is down. And actually, when I'm watching you move, how are you feeling? You're looking a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit laboured. So when I'm watching players move, I can see it as well because, like I said, I've been there 7, 8 years, and I'm able to see how the players I've worked with for a long time now, where they're maybe falling off. So I've got a fullback that's away with England at the moment, and I know 99% of the time when he goes up in the air, he will take off on his left and land on his left. Okay, he's getting a little bit of patella tendinopathy. Okay, so what do I need to do to facilitate that? Okay, do I need to necessarily test for it? No, he speaks to me, talks to me. Oh, Rob, this is flaring up. Okay, right, we're going to make sure that for you, this is your prep, your plyo days. You have a high plyo day and a low intensity plyo day. Okay, that's what it looks like in your week. Okay, I still need to make sure I drive an adaptation at that tendon. Right, okay, let's make sure we go for your big strength day here. Okay, what have we got in the main session that probably going to put you under the high ball a lot, where you might be having to do 5 or 6 repeated jumps live in the air. Okay, do I speak to my coaches? Look, we've got a 6 day turnaround here. Or within pre-season, my running loads are going to be higher. Right, I need to be keeping an eye on that. So to go back to your question, that okay, what am I testing? Yes, we will do our jumps. I will look for asymmetries between limbs. I'll do my traditional jump. I'll do my reactive jump. I'll do a triple hop with the younger lads to sort of assess the foundational patterns and movement adaptability again. Can they control themselves, their awareness of the body in space? And then I'll go isolated strength measures in different areas. On the physio bed, they'll look at range, they'll look at um, how they are moving on bed. And then outside, we'll use the training to test.
So I guess you're looking at those tests, let's go for like the counter movement jumps or things like that. Are you being guided from research which suggests either discrepancies between squat then jump and counter movement jump? It looks at particular utilization of strength, or are we looking at how if they're not capable of reaching certain parameters on their hamstrings, that leads to more injuries? Yeah, how are those tests grounded in the research?
Yeah, so again, I'm very lucky in that sense that one of my lecturers, John McMahon, who's the force plate guy, he works for Hawkins Dynamics. He's an excellent lecturer. Previously at Salisbury Uni, and he's been really good in coming to us, making sure that we're keeping up to date with the literature around sort of using jump measures to align our programming. So we don't necessarily go, okay, look at dynamic strength deficits, which I think was what you maybe were alluding to there, because we don't use the isometric assessment. We don't do like a ISO squat or a pull. And again, I may want to do that. I wouldn't mind doing that with some lads, but just for time frame and what I feel it's going to give me in line with other things, I might not want to go for that. But in terms of the jump measures, we do sort of take away the reactive side, the peak force side, um, and we do look at that. Yeah.
And then when the lads are going away with England, so you mentioned the lad who's away at England there. How are these plans, I guess, delivered to the England staff? Because they're going to have, I'd imagine, players from all over the place, and all of them are going to have this level of care that are put in each of their clubs, I'd imagine. The last thing you want is to send a boy away
Yeah.
on international duty, them not having awareness of some of the background periodization work you're doing, or some of the work you're doing that allows them to perform on a game day, them to receive a completely different type of care, and then them break down 30 minutes into a test or come back to you broken after having done a 5 week stint. So what type of dialogue is done between the national setups and the club setups to ensure that transition piece?
Well, certainly at the under 20 level, it's the dialogue's excellent in that I speak to Tim Hall a lot. He leads that, and we will go through each player. We'll look at how many minutes they've played that season, what's the breakdown of those minutes, how have they come, at what level have they come, and then we will go through. Okay, this is what their week looks like. This is their individual prep that they use, and Tim is excellent in facilitating that. And don't get me wrong, he has different um, barriers he has to contend with. He's traveling. He might not necessarily be able to do the session that the player would do back at home, but he's very good at facilitating that and he's very open to that. And it goes back and forth, you see, because some weeks they'll be in with England for 2 weeks at a time, then they'll come back. And when they go away for longer periods, that's where Tim will look after their programming. When they go to camp, we'll have the dialogue, and that's where we still program for them in terms of the gym side of things. But he's very good at even sharing, okay, this is the high day, this is the low day, this is what the units is going to look like. Do you have any concerns around that? And actually, let's not just be restrictive in our programming. It's like, where can we develop? Where can we push these lads? Certainly at the 20 level. Um, and they're excellent with it. So they're very positive on that front.
And that was actually going to be my next question. So when you're looking at it from a future-proofing point of view, like I'd imagine you look, I seen a video come across X the other day. I still keep wanting to say Twitter. X the other day about the marathon guy, and no one thought that you're going to be able to run below 2 hours for the marathon, and then he did that with it, sort of like seven pacemakers behind him and whatnot.
Yeah,
Obviously, the physical capacities and capabilities are constantly going to progress in some level. So how do you when you're planning what your group are capable of or what you're looking to stress test them against, or if you're going those high intensity days, how do you ensure that it's either replicable to the very top in the game? So if let's say New Zealand under 20s are the very, very top of their age group, and we want to make sure that some of our boys are capable of doing those types of physical things, or that in 5 years' time, when the game develops in a certain aspect, it might be, the use of the high ball, for example, has increased. So we need people that are going to be capable of jumping multiple times as a fullback to claim high balls and then land, which is something that maybe 15 years ago wouldn't have happened as much. How do you make sure that your groups are right at the cusp of having those physical capacities to go and perform at the very, very top level?
I'll be guilty and I'll be honest and I say I won't necessarily always just chase this perfect output. For me, I think if you get the basics right and you understand that player, okay, that's their super strength, then push on that. If that makes sense. So like we've got guys in our squad that can run a 10.5 meters per second, but how much more will I maybe progress him if I just hammer speed, speed, speed? Or I'm actually, could I potentially injure him and then he's not playing anyway? So there's a lot to be said for creating consistency and longevity in a player. And I'm not saying that you should never ever reach to be the top 1%. But we've got, for example, we've got a scrum half, Gus War. I think you've spoken about him previously on your podcast with Kev. He isn't the fastest player on the pitch, but the amount of minutes he gets through week in, week out, he's got that repeatability. So for me to say, right, okay, yes, you need to be a quicker nine, so we have quicker ruck speed. That's what I want. So I'll train speed, but the bandwidth of what he's capable of is limited by genetics and the time we have. So I'm more concerned about, okay, I want to develop these well-rounded athletes, a better generalist sometimes, and then push down on the super strengths. I hope that makes sense without basically saying, oh yeah, we don't
No, no, it
always
does
try
make
and
sense. I guess on that question then, do you think that for some players you might go like club rugby's as far they're ever going to get because of the genetics?
no, because Gus swore that player in question, and I love Gus, and he's a great bloke. First, he's not the quickest nine in the world, but he's away on international duty because he's technically and tactically brilliant. So this when we go back to the developing players, we don't just look at you've got to achieve and chase this 1% of the physical output to be the best in the world. Because you could be the best physical specimen on that pitch. But there's a couple of players I think of when I say this, but they trained like Tarzan and played like Jane. And that's where when we're developing players, it's I want a creative attacker, I want a defensive warrior, I want a relentless athlete, and I want a good bloke, a best teammate. And if you have those shining qualities, by all means, let's help push them. But it's not the be all and end all. And to go back to your question, it's like, yes, they're not physically the best, but he's going away on international duty. And you see that old Tom Brady one. When he was younger, he got dropped because he physically wasn't big enough. But it's like, best quarterback in the world, mate. So don't worry about it too much.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'll tell you the rationale behind this in a second. But there's a massive push in football, I would say at the moment, to go down the physical route, particularly at talent ID. I'd say that they go for players that they say at the top level, you have to be physically capable. So that's what we're going to go after. I'd imagine there'd be a similar discussion point in rugby due to the physical nature of it, and you look at some of the wingers and the size of them, they're 6'3" and able to move like absolute cheaters. So how does that differentiation work? Because you obviously got yourself saying that actually there's more to it than just being physically capable. There's these technical and tactical pieces and the person piece around it. Whereas you might have others in the building going, well, none of that other stuff matters unless they're able to provide us this physical stuff which they're going to need. So how does that discussion point? Yeah, I guess how is there a head to head with that in rugby, or is everyone relatively aligned?
I mean, there's questions around it. Is like, oh, he's not strong enough at the scrum. Well, what do you mean he's not strong enough at the scrum? Because we might be able to demonstrate that he's got the greatest neck strength in the team. He's got the greatest neck circumference, the biggest squat through range. So he's ticking all of those qualities, but he's not strong enough in the scrum. It's, well, technically, how much more time are you spending on that? And it's never a challenge, it's just a question to each other. And it's us understanding our system and our process. So my system and my process is developing those four strands that are under the four strands of creative, attacker, defensive, or a relentless athlete and best teammate, and then referring back to them. Because if we've got an end point of what we refer back to, where are they falling down? Because yes, we need them to be physically, and the game is moving that way. Momentum of contact is increasing. It is happening, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily a challenge our end because the coaches and the dialogue we have with each other, it's respect each other and we understand each other's. I'd like to think that we understand each other's process well enough to appreciate it.
I like the fact that you're able to use the numbers a little bit as well. You've kind of got some actionable things to say, well, no, he's capable of this and this and this. So maybe there's a different reason that
Exactly,
we're not seeing these figures in what you're saying is a challenge.
exactly, yeah, and that just comes from time in the environment, but then our coaches understanding them as well. So there's no point in me showing a GPS report and saying, yeah, fantastic. And I've done this before. I've shown a GPS report. Oh, he's got the highest speed. He's got the most work rate. And I'm like, well, did he play it well? Well, and I'm like, oh, yeah, well, probably not. Do you know what I mean? So it's me appreciating their side and them appreciating our side. And we've got to be able to speak in a way that coaches can and players can understand. And that's why if you go back to the testing, it's not just having a load of numbers that spit out because what those numbers mean to you means something different to the coach. So it's when we go back to our foundations, our processes, it's like, look, this is the things that we look at and we agree that successful prof needs to do. Okay, so from us, and when I compare them to another player that we can all agree on, he can do this. So maybe there's something else that we can facilitate in his week. And it might not just be the technical, tactical side of things. Is he having trouble at home? Is he getting on top of his recovery? It's like, are we getting around that play? Don't just chase this physical number. And certainly I can hands up, and I think most S&Cs can when they're younger, is just change it, chase this massive number and hide behind numbers. It's strength and conditioning coach. And I think that's where I've certainly sort of come back to right. I've just got to try and be a coach first, because at the end of the day, that's what the rugby coaches are as well, and they're in it for the same reason.
And how do you manage the late maturation piece? Because I'd imagine I've spoken to S&C coaches and rugby coaches on this podcast before, and particularly 14s, 15s, 16s, it seems like a minefield even more so than football. How do you manage that even like 2021? Because I'd imagine you're still going to have some players that maybe aren't fully matured yet or haven't. I use the very layman's term of man body. They haven't got put on all their
Yeah,
bulk, their muscle and stuff. So how do you manage that for maybe those players that you think, listen, we're seeing really good numbers comparative to their bio-banding age group, or the technique and tactical stuff is ahead of where other people in their position is. We just need to be patient with them because obviously you still have to prepare them enough and keep them in the system long enough to be robust to play games and train and not break down against maybe your more physically advanced players at that moment in time.
yeah. So and it's a good question because again, I think you could certainly be guilty, and I don't think we are. You could be guilty of trying to throw people in really early and go, yep, right, he's good to go. He's had a good game there. Like, right, that's it. He's a first team now. And it's like, well, no. And the beauty of I think we have at Sharks, we've got a real good team led by Fergus Mulcrone in the academy and Gareth Harris, who looks after the transition of players. We can have a real open dialogue around, okay, this is our player. This is where he's at. He's had some success. He's had some success at senior level. He's getting attention at international level. He's even been spoken about in the media. This tight head, for example, I'm speaking about, but he still needs to develop some of the physical qualities because technically he's fantastic. So what does his season look like? He's way on international. Okay, we need to give him his break. When he comes back in, when does he next play? Well, actually, do we give him a 6 to 8 week development block within his program? Yes, he's in with the first team because like what's important to remember is our senior academy players, our 18 to 23s, are training full time with the senior players. So let's make sure that we're being very individualized for him when he comes back in. And then I'm looking further down the year. Okay, where's an opportunity for him to play? And knowing the depth of our players, I know that my starting tight head, unfortunately, he's got a bit of an injury history. Oh, right, okay. He may need to come back out of that. So it's very important that we get this now, whilst we have the depth in the squad. And through Ferg and Gaz, the senior academy coaches, we can have that dialogue with the more senior coaches, and they're all on board with that because they see the talent that these guys have because they do need to develop that man body.
Mm.
Um, so that's how we go about it. And the loan clubs that we place them at, we're very conscious of what level we place them at. You got great links with Sale FC next door, and I do some consultancy work there. We can keep an eye on them when they're there because those days that they train on a Tuesday and Thursday at loan tend to be our biggest days as well. So what's his exposure on a Tuesday? Right, okay, actually, he's not needed in the main team session. I can get him into some of the real constructive units, but then he's going to do some of his rugby on the Tuesday night, but not do the units at Loan Club. But I'm going to make sure that his week has got his 3 to 4 sessions in with Jim to facilitate that. He's having the conversations with the nutritionists. If that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And do you get many situations where maybe those later quartile players are low performing at this moment in time? So they are just, let's say you've got an inside centre that's, 4 kg down on everyone he's playing against, and he's just finding it tough and it's low performing. But you as a department are looking at his body of work and how you know him and maybe what you've seen in previous case studies of physical development going, we think that there's a really high potential but is low performing at the moment. How would you manage, I guess, that dialogue with the coaches?
Yeah, it's use reflection. It's and use reflection and experiences, because then the coaches can draw on it. So again, yeah, we did have a centre. Fortunately, he's moving on this year, and he may not be performing at the level that they see him, but his style of play might not be suiting into the style of this. The player he is might not be suiting the. If we were talking about a centre, might not be suiting the style of play that we're going for. If he's trying to play like a Manu, he he might not be a Manu. If they're using him as a Manu, that's not what he is.
Yeah.
So it's like, actually, is he a different type of outside centre? So it's being careful. And I think centres are the hardest position to program for. If we're to talk about centres, they have to be quick, they have to be repeatability, they have to be heavy, they have to have a very high skill set, they have to be strong on the defensive side of the ball. It's so hard to get these guys right. And then they have to then fit in around the style of play. It's it's a hard position to prep for. So I think when you talk about centres, it's always a good one.
Yeah, it's for me, it's a really interesting point of view that the discussion around if the player's in the right environment for how you play. Because
Exactly.
I often think it's at the top level with like first team players where in football they're trying to sell a player and they're going, oh, you obviously don't rate him because you're trying to move him out the door. Whereas I think it'd be really refreshing if a coach came out and said, no, we think he's a really good player. Like there's no doubt in terms of the quality and capacity he has. For us, he just doesn't fit what we are trying to do.
Exactly.
And being really comfortable that if you're a high pressing team, maybe having a 6'6" striker that doesn't like running around probably isn't the move for you. And you're not diminishing the player. You're just saying he doesn't fit what we're after. Whereas it always seems as a slight when you let someone go out the door either on a free or transfer fee, going, well, you obviously don't rate him, rather than just going, no, he just doesn't fit what we're after. This mold, we think he'll do great somewhere else, just not with us.
Yeah, and that's why it's even in that sense. I always go back to my head of coach the player, not the program. So it's yes, that's the style of play, and we want you to. I want you to be successful in this team, but unfortunately, sometimes players are better have better fit elsewhere, and we've seen players leave us and go to other clubs and thrive, and that's not a problem. Nick Dolly, he's gone to Leicester, came through our process, and wasn't maybe underperforming here, but he's gone to Leicester and he had a big injury, but he's kicked on. Curtis Langdon, he's now with Northampton. He's just won the Premiership. So, and he wasn't our first pick 2 seasons ago. So it's how they
Yeah.
fit in that into that mold. And but we're all playing rugby, but the coaches, and I can't speak on the part of the coaches because they have their game model. But not every player is going to fit into the perfect mold, in my opinion.
No, it makes sense. And then on that centre bit that you just referred to, how do you plan for someone that needs all of those capacities? Because I imagine, if you've got a loose head, tight head, we need them to be robust at the scrum and we need them to be able to absorb contacts, etc. If you're looking for maybe a winger, we go and listen. We want predominantly speed. That's what we're going after with our wingers because we're going to play expansive rugby. We need them to be able to, in a 1v1, be able to beat someone. But obviously, at the centre's point of view, they do need a lot of skills. How do you plan for that when you're in your situation?
Yeah, so one of the players I've done the most work with is a player called Connor Doherty, and he's the player in question that had an Achilles injury, and we actually just sat down and we watched some of his games. We looked at how he played, how he wanted to play, and we worked back from that. And then I know at the same time what outputs that we get in a game. Okay, are you getting those outputs? Are you able to get those outputs? If I'm pushing you too hard towards those outputs, is the engine light coming on? So if I knew that he does a certain amount of work over 7 meters per second, high speed run, very high speed running, we call it, he will start creaking within a set week on a set turnaround. So then with that player in question, we've gone back to his why, how he wants to play, what he wants to facilitate. So this is where I go back to the planning periodization. We'll sit down, we'll look at a couple of weeks. We'll go, okay, we've got a 7 day turnaround, a 9 day turnaround, a 6 day turnaround. The 9 day turnaround for you is probably the danger because the coaches get dead excited. I get dead excited. Let's get loads of work into you. Oh, just come off a 6 day turnaround into a 9 day turnaround, then it's like, do we want to be sprinting you on game day +2, or do we want to, maybe we facilitate the recovery for you because you are banged up. That game you've just played, you've got a lot of contacts in it because of you are a centre, you're a ball carrying centre, and then okay, you want to develop your footwork at the line, you want to develop your footwork both sides of the ball. What does your prep look like before you go out? So I know for this player, we did a lot of work on his ability to chop the feet, push away, a hand off, and then run a curve into a contact. So we made drills that challenged attacking and making space, and that was the terms we used. And then, right, okay, how do we attack and make space in our prep this day, knowing that's going to be the session? When am I going to sprint fast? I'm going to sprint fast here. When am I going to get some contact extras? I'm going to get them here. Who are the coaches I need to get in on that conversation? Because I don't know the intricacies of playing that position. But I do know that the coaches and other players will come in and they'll help us design those sessions and then create the habits for that player. So he was the player I went back to before. That he now has these real robust these habits that he does to prep himself to develop that. That's every day. So game day straight away. What's my recovery look like? What's the next day look like? What does what's my habit on game day plus two when I know that I've got my fastest session? So it's more of creating the habit. So to go back to the question, it's when how do you develop that center? I understand his why, bring him on board, and then coach the player, not the program.
And how do you manage when two things are going against one another? So maybe you're looking for a situation where you want him to be quicker, but you're also looking to maybe add some bulk to him to be able to absorb contact. They might be two contradicting aims. How do you go around managing the program so that he's still seeing maybe some improvements in those areas, but you're not skewing the scales too far in one way?
Yeah, it's just little microdoses, isn't it? So it's like, okay, he's a center. We might want to put a little bit of mass on. So okay, you do two extra shoulder sessions on the back of a on a light on a heavier day. If you feel comfortable with that, are you all right with that? Is that affecting us when you go into the session the next day? No. Okay, a little microdose and then educating them. Be honest. Look, you are not going to put 5 kilos on in a week and a half, 2 weeks. So be sensible with your nutrition as well. So that's the biggest thing. Again, it just comes back to coaching the player and educating them and saying, look, this is what you want to achieve. Yes, right. This is how I would do it within a week. Do you think that's a good plan? Do you feel you can do that and work towards that? Because if I give them loads of stuff to do and then they can't adhere to it because it's too much, it's like and not understanding what they've got going on at home as well. It's a waste of my time and theirs.
Perfect. Right, Rob, I've got two last questions for you. So the second to last one is what in your field at the moment or in your body of work at the moment are you really excited about as an idea or principle that maybe you don't think's mainstream at the moment?
Anything that's mainstream. I might push back a little bit and they sound a bit controversial. But you've seen loads and loads of people. There's lots and lots of work on Speedworks, and not Speedworks, the company, sorry, but as in develop just speed. For me, I think we've got to be very conscious, and what makes the good coaches and what I'm passionate about is, and this is from my experience, is take a helicopter view and zoom out. Yes, I want to develop a quicker player, but don't just make that the only thing. Does that answer the question? So,
Yeah, yeah.
is what excites me is being aware of the whole player and the whole environment. Yes, I want my players to be bigger, quicker, faster, stronger, but zoom out and like I said, that comes from experience and experience within the last year as well. In that I might have been rehabbing a player in a very catastrophic knee injury, and I was like, right, I've got to develop these speed qualities. I've got to try and do X, Y, and Z, and I'm a bit like, why don't I zoom out and just look more at the what I know is my process, my movement adaptability, my foundational patterns. Take him rock climbing, get him comfortable in different shapes, take him to yoga, take him with Manu did salsa dancing on a return from Achilles rupture. So it's not being too, I think you've got to be a better generalist at times. I think we sometimes as S&Cs try and be super, super specialists. And yes, that is needed. But in my area, the 18 to 23s, I'm excited about being yes, a generalist, but then facilitating it all.
Well, I think what I've had a lot during this thing as well is saying foundationals. You've mentioned foundational quite a few
Yeah,
quite a few times. So I'd imagine that yeah, the foundations that you have in place and providing players with a good set of tools to be able to use is a big one for sure.
yeah,
And
because
then go on,
so
sorry.
many sports deliver that. And like, if you want to create buy-in, if you can get lads to do other things, like regardless of their age, we'll do it because it's different, it's fun. So even when we're out with the seniors, we'll do different things in warm-ups and our prep where they're developing qualities and building on them, but without knowing they're doing it. And that's just getting different things and different sports involved.
No, yeah, perfect. I agree. I agree with you. I think the multi-sport aspect to it and giving them exposure to different stuff is huge. And then, last question for me, which is if I was to speak to your colleagues or the players you work with and ask them to describe you in 3 words, and why, how would you hope you were described?
I'd probably say that detailed, in that I spend a lot of time trying to deliver a good product for the club and for the player. So detailed would be one. Passionate. Oh yeah, it's a tough one when you're trying to think about it on the spot, isn't it? Um,
Well, go for those two. As I said, I'm normally more
yeah,
interested in the why. So why do you
yeah.
hope they describe you in those ways? And I think, like you said, like the detailed one is a really good one. Detail around what you're doing, what you're able to provide for the players, and things like that. It probably goes to what you value, and what you bring to the organization. So yeah, it's more the why that I'm always interested in than necessarily the words. But Rob, listen, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for bearing with the Zoom nightmare that we had at the start as well, and allotting a little bit more time for this. And I'm sure everyone who's listening had a great insight into the work you do, and yeah, the foundational pieces that you put into the players. So thank you again so much for your time.
No, no, thank you very much. Cheers, Michael.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.